Welcome, dear listener. Let your shoulders settle, just a little, into whatever cradles you tonight. There is no rush here, no hurry, nothing waiting for you on the other side of this gentle hour except sleep itself, soft and unhurried, like snow drifting onto a quiet field. Tonight we are going to step backward through time. Slowly, the way one might wade into still water at dusk, we are going somewhere wide, somewhere golden, somewhere nearly forgotten. Imagine, if you will, a vast ocean of grass rolling endlessly beneath an immense and tender sky. The wind moves through it the way a slow hand smooths a quilt, and the light, oh, the light is the colour of warm honey poured over old wood. Out there, in the middle of that great hush, stands a small log cabin. Just one. Its chimney releases a slow ribbon of pale wood smoke that curls upward into the violet evening. The door is slightly ajar, waiting, and there is no one inside who would mind if we wandered in, took off our worries at the threshold and stayed a while. This is the home of pioneers, the people who once carved gentle lives out of the open prairie. Tonight, we shall step inside, breathe in the scent of pine sap and wood smoke, and listen to the quiet language of their world. Close your eyes if you wish. Loosen your jaw. Let the long grass whisper. We are nearly there. Before we cross that wooden threshold, before the latch lifts and the warm hush of the cabin folds around us, let me share one small thought with you, spoken softly, the way you might share a secret beside a low-burning lamp. If you find comfort in these slow journeys, in these long, drifting walks through the corridors of history, you may wish to linger here a little longer than just tonight. There is a small, quiet way to do that. Somewhere near the bottom of your screen, there is a gentle button, the subscribe button, and beside it a tiny bell. They wait there patiently, the way an old lantern waits on a windowsill, asking nothing, ready whenever you are. Tapping them is a soft kindness, both to yourself and to this little channel. It means that on another night, when the world feels loud and sleep feels far, another long, fushed story will be waiting for you, already lit, already warm. You will not have to search. You will only have to close your eyes. There is no urgency in this invitation, no bright noise. Only the quiet thought that companionship across these slow hours is a gift we share together. You in your stillness, and this voice drifting gently into it. And now, with that small thought set softly aside, like a folded letter placed on a windowsill, let us return to the grasslands. The cabin door is waiting. The lantern within is already glowing. Come. Step inside with me. The door, when it opens, does not creak in the sharp way one might expect of old timber. No, this door breathes. It exhales softly on its leather hinges, hinges cut from the supple hide of a deer and nailed in place by a steady, patient hand many seasons ago. The sound it makes is closer to a long, contented sigh, the kind of sound a sleeping animal might make when shifting in its bed of straw. The wood of the door itself is hewn from a single broad slab of cottonwood, smoothed not by sandpaper or plane but by years of human touch, by the quiet polishing of countless palms that have pushed it open and pulled it shut, morning after morning, evening after evening, season after gentle season. As the door swings inward, the prairie wind, which had been tugging softly at our sleeves only a moment ago, falls away behind us. It is replaced by something altogether different, something deeper, something almost like an embrace. The air inside the cabin is warmer, thicker, slower. It carries within it the layered perfume of a life lived close to the earth, and if you allow yourself to breathe in deeply, you may begin to recognize the individual notes that compose this gentle fragrance. There is, first and foremost, the scent of wood smoke, not the harsh, acrid smoke of a freshly kindled fire, but the mellow, well-aged smoke of a hearth that has been burning quietly for many hours, perhaps many years. This smoke has settled into every fibre of the cabin, into the rough bark of the logs, into the woven threads of the rag rug upon the floor, into the worn cotton of the curtains that hang limply over the small square window. It is a scent that whispers of warmth, of survival, of long winter nights and slow summer dawns. Beneath the wood smoke lies another note, softer, sweeter, more elusive. It is the scent of pine sap, slowly weeping from the cut ends of the logs that form the cabin's walls. Even after years of seasoning, even after the harshest winters and the most blistering summers, the wood still remembers the forest from which it came. On warm afternoons, when the sun strikes the south-facing wall, tiny golden beads of resin will rise to the surface of the timber, glistening like amber tears, releasing into the still air a fragrance that is at once medicinal and deeply, deeply comforting. And beneath that, threaded through everything, is the scent of the prairie itself, which has wandered in through every crack and crevice, settling into the cabin like a second, quieter inhabitant. It is the dry, golden smell of cured grass, of sun-warmed earth, of wildflowers pressed flat by the wind. It is a scent that cannot be bottled or named, only recognized the way one recognizes the face of an old friend across a crowded room. Let your eyes adjust now, slowly, to the gentle dimness within. The light in here is not the bright, declarative light of the outdoors. It is a softer thing, a filtered thing, arriving in narrow shafts through the single small window and through the chinks between the logs where the daubing has begun, ever so slightly to crumble away. These thin ribbons of late afternoon light fall across the room in pale, slanting columns, and within each column you can see thousands upon thousands of dust motes, drifting, turning, performing their slow and silent ballet. Watch them for a moment, these dust motes. They are not in any hurry. They rise and fall in patterns too delicate for the eye to fully trace, lifted by invisible currents of warm air rising from the hearth, settled again by the cool draught that slips beneath the door. Each one, viewed up close, would be revealed to be a tiny fragment of this household's history, a flake of skin from a child who once stood on tiptoe to peer out the window, a thread loosened from a grandmother's shawl as she rocked beside the fire, fleck of flour from yesterday's bread, still drifting, still suspended in the slow amber light. The whole life of the cabin, you might say, is held in those drifting motes, weightless and luminous and softly turning. The floor beneath our feet is made of split logs, hewn flat on their upper surface and laid side by side across the bare earth below. Over the years, the constant tread of moccasined and booted feet has worn these planks smooth in particular places, particular pathways, and you can read the family's habits in those gentle hollows. There is a worn place near the door where boots were stamped free of mud and snow. There is another worn place before the hearth where someone has stood, year after year, stirring a pot, tending the fire, warming small hands. And there is a long, soft trail leading from the hearth to the bed in the corner, the path of countless tired footsteps walking towards sleep. The walls themselves are constructed of logs, of course the great pale logs of cottonwood and oak that the family hauled one by one from the distant river bottom. Each log was notched at its ends, fitted carefully to its neighbours, and the gaps between them filled with a mixture of clay, straw and grass, a humble plaster the pioneers called chinking. Over the seasons, the chinking has dried and cracked in some places, swelled and softened in others, and now it forms a kind of textured topography, a rough and pleasing landscape of light and shadow that runs along every wall. If you reach out and run your fingertips lightly across the logs, you will feel the work of the axe in every contour. Not the smooth mechanical regularity of a sawn board, but the soft, undulating rhythm of human labour. You can almost feel the swing of the blade, the steady breath of the man who shaped this wood, the small pauses he took to wipe his brow and consider his next stroke. The walls of this cabin are not merely walls. They are a record. They are a slow, silent autobiography written in cottonwood and oak, telling the story of how this small shelter came to be. In the corner stands a stool, three-legged, low to the ground, its seat polished to a soft sheen by long use. Beside it, a wooden bucket, half full of clear water, its surface so still that it perfectly reflects the dim ceiling beams above. The water trembles only slightly in time with our breathing, in time with the slow expansion and contraction of the wooden walls as the prairie evening cools. Everything here, you begin to notice, is calm. Not empty, no, but calm. Every object has its place. Every object is touched daily, used daily, loved in the quiet, unspoken way that essential things are loved. Nothing is decorative for the sake of decoration. Nothing is wasted. And somehow, in that gentle economy, in that careful matching of object to purpose, there is a deep, deep peace. Take another breath. Let the cabin hold you. The light is fading slowly through the small window, and somewhere outside, far across the prairie, meadowlark is singing its long, sweet, evening song. We are home. We are perfectly safe. And there is so much more to see. Allow your eyes now to drift slowly toward the center of the cabin's gentle gravity, the place where every life within these walls quietly orbits. It is the hearth, that ancient, patient companion of mankind, the slow and steady heart that beats within every old home, here in this small pioneer cabin upon the Great Plains. The hearth is not merely a place where fire is kept, it is the cabin's very soul, its first reason for being, the warm and glowing center around which every other object, every other moment, every other breath has been carefully arranged. The hearth itself is built of stones gathered one by one from the bed of a distant creek, where the water had spent untold generations smoothing them, polishing them, turning them in its slow and patient hands. Each stone is a different color, a different shape, a different memory of some far place. There are stones the color of cream, stones the color of pewter, stones the color of an autumn apple just before it falls. Some are streaked with veins of darker mineral, like the lines on the back of an old hand. Some are speckled with tiny crystals that catch the firelight and throw it back in small secret sparks. The mason, perhaps the father of this household, perhaps his own father before him, fitted these stones together with a mixture of mud and lime, pressing each one into place with calloused thumbs, judging the balance by eye and by feel, building upward, slowly, patiently, until the chimney rose high enough to draw the smoke up through the roof and out into the wide prairie sky. Within this stone embrace burns the fire, not a roaring, leaping, theatrical fire, but a low, contented, well-tended fire, the kind that has been carefully maintained for many hours by a hand that knows its work. The logs at its heart have burned down to glowing coals, deep red and orange and softest gold, and these coals pulse gently, breathing, dimming, brightening, dimming again, as if they too were drawing slow and peaceful breaths in time with the sleeping cabin. Watch the fire for a moment. There is a kind of small magic in it. A single ember at the base, glowing the color of a setting sun, will brighten suddenly as a draught passes across it, blooming into a brilliant orange flower for half a heartbeat before fading back into a deep smouldering crimson. Above the coals, thin tongues of flame rise and fall, blue at their roots, gold at their middles, almost transparent at their tips, dancing in patterns that no two fires have ever quite repeated. They lean one way, then another, bowing to currents of air invisible to the human eye, telling in their silent, flickering language the secret weather of the room. The wood that feeds this fire is mostly cottonwood, the readiest fuel of the plains, though there are sometimes pieces of harder oak or hickory mixed in for the long, slow burn of the night. As each piece settles deeper into the bed of coals, it speaks in the soft language of old fires. There is the gentle hiss of moisture being driven from the heart of the wood, a sound like a distant whispered secret. There is the small dry pop of sap meeting flame, a sound like the careful turning of a page, and there is the long, almost musical sigh of the log as it gives up its last shape and collapses, quietly into glowing dust. The light from this fire is not steady. It breathes, it pulses, it throws soft amber circles outward across the room, and these circles tremble slightly, the way reflected light trembles on the underside of a wooden bridge above a slow-moving stream. Every object touched by this light is transformed. The iron kettle hanging from its crane gleams the color of dark molasses, the wooden mantle above the hearth glows like polished honey, The pewter cup resting on the mantle's edge becomes a small, soft moon. Even the dust on the stones, the fine grey dust of countless evenings, takes on a faint and gentle radiance, as though it too were holding within itself a tiny memory of the flame. Above the fire, suspended from a wrought iron crane that swings outward when needed, hangs the cooking kettle. This kettle is one of the most precious objects in the entire cabin, a thing carried west across countless miles, wrapped first in a quilt and later in straw, tied to the side of a wagon, sheltered through rainstorms and river crossings and long, dusty afternoons. It is made of black cast iron, heavy as a small child, and its surface bears the soft patina of long, faithful service. Inside it, even now, a low simmer is taking place. Simple stew, perhaps, of beans and salt pork, or a slow-cooked porridge meant to greet the family in the morning, gently bubbling, releasing into the air a faint, savoury perfume that mingles with the wood smoke and the pine and the prairie grass. On the hearthstone itself, a flat slab of soapstone warmed by the fire's edge, rests a small Dutch oven, its lid heaped with glowing coals. Within it, perhaps, a loaf of bread is baking, slowly, patiently, the way all good things were baked in the time before clocks and timers, judged not by the minute but by the scent rising through the iron, by the soft hollow sound when the lid is lightly tapped, be the deep instinct of a baker who has done this thing 10,000 times before. Beside the hearth stands a small wooden box, low and rough-hewn, filled with split kindling and bark for tomorrow's morning fire. Beside that, leaning against the chimney stones, rests the iron poker, its long handle worn smooth and dark by many hands, its tip blackened by countless gentle stirrings of the embers. And beside the poker a small twig broom made of bound prairie grass, used to sweep the hearthstone clean each evening, a humble little ritual that marks, in its quiet way, the closing of each day. The mantel above the fire is a single broad plank, hewn from a great cottonwood limb, smoothed flat on its upper surface and pegged into the chimney stones with wooden dowels. Upon it rest a few small treasures of the household, a tin candle holder blackened with use, pottery jar glazed in a deep mossy green, holding a small bouquet of dried prairie flowers, their colours faded now to soft browns and golds, but still beautiful, still patient, still keeping their long vigil. A small wooden box no larger than the palm of a hand, where matches are kept dry, and a single tin-type photograph, framed in pressed black metal, showing the faces of two old people, perhaps the parents or grandparents of those who live here now, gazing out from the silvered glass with the still, solemn eyes of an earlier age. The fire pops softly, a small ember lifts, drifts upward through the warm air of the chimney and is gone. The kettle releases a tiny puff of fragrant steam, the light pulses, gentles, deepens, and we are held, you and I, in this perfect amber stillness where time has softened to the consistency of warm honey, and there is nowhere, anywhere in the world that we need to be. Step softly, now, away from the warm glow of the hearth, and allow your gaze to settle upon the simple, sturdy furniture that fills the rest of this gentle room. Each piece has its own quiet story to tell, its own memory of the hand that shaped it, its own slow patina of usefulness earned across the long succession of prairie days and prairie nights. In the corner farthest from the door stands the bed. It is a humble construction by any measure. Its frame is built of peeled saplings, lashed together with strips of wet rawhide that, as they dried, drew themselves taut and pulled the joints into a fierce and faithful tightness. The bedposts rise no higher than a man's hip, and at their tops the wood has been gently rounded by some long-ago whittling knife, smoothed into soft domes that catch the firelight like polished river stones. The frame itself is strung not with metal springs, for there were no metal springs to be had on the open plains in those years, but with a careful crisscross of rope woven in a pattern as old as human sleep itself. From time to time, every few weeks or so, the rope must be retightened with a small wooden tool called a bed key, and from this humble necessity, it is said, came the old kind farewell, "Sleep tight." Atop the rope lies the mattress, which is itself a small marvel of prairie ingenuity. A great cloth tick sewn from heavy linen has been stuffed full of whatever soft material the seasons have provided. In summer, it might be filled with prairie grass, dried sweet in the sun, releasing with every shift of the sleeper a faint hay-scented breath. In autumn, it might be plumped with corn husks which whisper and rustle softly through the night, a sound like a stream running gently under a bridge of leaves. In the deepest winter, if the family has been blessed with enough geese, the tick might be filled with down, the very softest treasure, light as a held breath, warm as a kept secret. Above this mattress lie the quilts. Oh, the quilts! Even in the dim amber light you can see that they are works of patient art. The topmost is a simple log cabin pattern, fitting, of course, for a home such as this. Each small square is constructed of strips of fabric arranged around a tiny central square of red, which represents in the old quilting tradition the warm hearth at the heart of every dwelling. The strips themselves are a quiet history of the family. Here is a piece of blue calico from a dress the eldest daughter wore on the day she turned 15. Here is a strip of brown wool from her father's winter coat, the one he wore the year the snows came early. Here is a sliver of pale yellow cotton from a baby's christening gown, soft now from many, many washings. Each square is a small museum, each stitch is a memory. To sleep beneath this quilt is to sleep beneath the gathered tenderness of years. Beside the bed stands a small chest, made of cherry wood brought west in a wagon many years ago. Its corners have been bumped and rubbed by hard travel, and one of its iron hinges has been repaired with a strip of leather, but it still closes firmly, still keeps its quiet promise. Within it lie the family's treasures, things too precious for daily handling. A bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon, a small leather-bound Bible, its pages soft as moth wings from constant turning, its margins filled with the careful pencil notes of 3 generations, a lock of hair bound with thread kept in a small paper envelope, a single child's tooth wrapped in tissue, the sum total of one family's quiet, irreplaceable history kept safe in a box of cherry wood beside a sleeping place upon the great open plains. Across the room, beneath the small window, stands the table. It is the longest single piece of furniture in the cabin, hewn from a broad plank of oak that the father felled himself, dragged home with the help of a borrowed ox, and shaped slowly with adze and plane over the course of many long evenings. The surface of the table bears the soft topography of long use. There are faint, dark rings where hot kettles have been set down. There are tiny cuts and nicks where countless knives have done their gentle work. There is a polished spot near one end where a child has rested his elbow year after year, while doing his lessons by lamplight. The grain of the oak runs in long, sweeping waves across the surface, and where the wood has been rubbed by use it gleams the deep, warm gold of a slow autumn afternoon. Around the table stand 4 chairs, each one slightly different from its companions, for they were made one at a time as the family grew and as time and materials allowed. Their seats are woven of corn husks plaited tightly into firm, supple platforms that give just slightly beneath a sitter's weight. Their backs are made of bent saplings steamed over the fire and shaped against forms, then left to dry into their gentle curves. The wood of each chair has been smoothed by years of climbing on, sliding off, leaning back, getting up. The chairs themselves seem to hold in their patient stillness the shape of every body that has ever sat in them, a kind of quiet, accumulated welcome. In another corner stands the spinning wheel. It is not in motion now, but even in its stillness it suggests the long, peaceful work it performs, the slow turning of fibre into thread, of thread into fabric, of fabric into the very clothing that warms this family's days. The wheel is made of birch and ash, polished to a soft sheen by the constant brush of many seasons of working hands. The treadle below is worn into a gentle hollow where the spinner's foot has rested. The bobbins on their pegs hold small skeins of wool undyed, the soft creamy colour of unbleached linen, smelling faintly of lanolin and cedar. Near the spinning wheel, hanging from a wooden peg in the wall, is a small basket woven of willow wreaths. Inside it lie balls of yarn in various muted colours, the colours of natural dyes, the pale yellow drawn from goldenrod blossoms, the soft russet drawn from walnut hulls, the dusty rose drawn from pokeberry, the mossy green drawn from the leaves of black walnut and a touch of iron. Each colour is a small history of a season, of a gathering, of an afternoon spent stirring a steaming kettle behind the cabin while the dye took its slow, patient bite into the waiting wool. And resting against the spinning wheel, as though set there only a moment ago, is a half-finished pair of woolen mittens, one complete and one still upon its needles, the yarn trailing softly down to a small ball of pale grey. They wait with infinite patience for the next quiet evening, the next slow hour beside the fire, the next gentle resumption of an ancient peaceful time. And in that waiting, in that pause between one stitch and the next, you can almost hear the slow soft heartbeat of this entire careful handmade world. Cross now gently to the small square window set into the cabin's southern wall. Lay your hand against the sill, which is itself nothing more than a thick plank of cottonwood, smoothed by years of leaning elbows and resting forearms. Notice how the wood is darker here than elsewhere, polished by the constant touch of human skin, by the slow oils of 1,000 contemplative pauses. This is a place where a person has stood again and again, season after season, looking outward, dreaming, waiting, watching. The window itself is a small wonder of this rough country. It is not a single great pane of clear glass, no, for such glass was rare and costly upon the open prairie, and a single full sheet would have required a journey of many days by wagon to obtain, with the very real chance of arriving home with only a wagon bed full of glittering, useless shards. Instead, this window is a humble lattice of 4 small panes, each one no larger than the palm of a man's hand, set into a wooden frame and fixed in place with thin strips of soft pine. The glass itself bubbles slightly, ripples slightly, holds within it tiny imperfections, small bubbles trapped during the long-ago breath of some distant glass-blower's lung. When you look through it, the prairie beyond seems to waver ever so gently, as though seen through the surface of a slow and shallow stream. In winter this window is sometimes covered, on the inside, with a thin sheet of oiled paper, which holds the heat in better than glass alone, and which allows the light to pass through in a soft milky glow. In summer it is left bare, and from time to time it is washed with vinegar water and a soft cloth until the panes shine like still pools. But always, always the window remembers the touch of weather. There are tiny scratches upon its outer surface made by wind-blown grit. There are faint, ghostly smudges where small fingers have pressed against it on cold mornings, leaving the brief print of curiosity. There is in one corner a very small chip in the glass made by a hailstone 3 summers ago when the storm came down upon the cabin like a great drum being beaten by a giant's hand. Look outward, now, through the wavering panes. The view is wide, wider perhaps than any view you have known. There is a sense, when standing at this window, that the world itself has been opened to its fullest possible extent, that the very curve of the earth is visible, that one is looking out across not merely a field or a meadow, but across the entire patient surface of the planet. The prairie stretches away in every direction, an ocean made of grass. In the foreground, perhaps 30 paces from the cabin, the tall bluistom grass rises higher than a child's head, its slender stems swaying in lazy, rhythmic patterns, each one tipped with a soft tassel of seed. The wind moves through this grass not in sudden gusts, but in long, slow, travelling waves, and the waves can be seen approaching from a great distance, rippling closer and closer like the slow breath of some immense and gentle creature, until at last they reach the cabin and pass softly around it, leaving in their wake a quiet shushing sound like the brushing of 1,000 soft skirts. Beyond the tall grass lies a stretch of shorter prairie, where buffalo grass and grama grass grow close to the earth, forming a fine, dense carpet the colour of milky tea. Wildflowers bloom here in their patient seasons. In spring, the pale lavender of the prairie phlox and the soft yellow of the butterfly weed scatter themselves across the green like tiny coins thrown by a benevolent hand. In summer, the deep magenta of the coneflower and the bright orange of the prairie lily lift themselves above the grass like small flames. In autumn, the sunflowers turn their great yellow faces eastward each morning, following the slow climb of the sun, an entire field bowing in patient unison. Far in the distance, perhaps a mile away, perhaps 2, a thin dark line marks the course of a creek, It is a winding, hesitant line, drawn across the grass by some long-ago hand, and along its banks grow the only trees for miles. They are mostly cottonwoods, tall and pale-trunked, their leaves turning over in the breeze to show their silvery undersides, so that from a distance the whole grove seems to shimmer, to flicker like a candle flame seen through gauze. There are also a few willows along the creek, their long narrow leaves trailing into the water, and an occasional gnarled oak, older than the cabin, older than the family, older perhaps than any human memory of this particular stretch of land. Above all of this stretches the sky. The sky upon the Great Plains is not like the sky in other places. It is larger, it is more present. It seems somehow to begin not far above the earth, but right at the level of the grass itself, rising upward in great vaulted layers of pale blue and creamy white. Clouds drift across this sky with a slow and stately grace, casting long travelling shadows that move across the prairie like quiet companions, darkening the grass briefly before passing onward. In the late afternoon, these clouds may take on the soft pink of a rose petal, the gold of poured cream, the deep lavender of a sleeping iris. In the evening they will gather themselves into great purple cathedrals at the western horizon, releasing the sun by slow inches into its long tender setting. Meadowlark sits upon a fence post not far from the window, its yellow breast bright in the slanting light, its black collar sharp and elegant. It tilts back its small head and releases its long, slow, fluting song, a sequence of 7 or 8 notes that hangs in the air long after the bird itself has fallen silent, as though the music had taken on its own slow life. From farther away, another meadowlark answers, and then a third, and the song travels across the prairie that way, from post to post, from bird to bird, across miles of grass, a quiet conversation that has been going on, in one form or another, for thousands upon thousands of years. There is a bench just outside the window, made of a single split log laid across 2 stumps of cottonwood. It is the place where the woman of the cabin sometimes sits in the late afternoon, peeling potatoes into a wooden bowl, or shelling peas, or simply resting her hands in her lap and watching the slow movement of the light across the grass. The bench is empty now, but it holds in its quiet patience the ghost of every evening that has ever been spent upon it, every song that has ever been sung beside it, every small dream that has ever drifted upward from its weathered surface into the great patient sky above. The light, you notice, has begun to deepen. The honey of the late afternoon is slowly turning to amber. A single firefly has lifted itself from the long grass and begun its slow signalling dance across the prairie evening. Somewhere far away a coyote calls once, softly, and is answered more softly still. The cabin holds its breath, the window keeps its long, patient watch, and the world, in all its immense and tender beauty, prepares to slip into the gentle arms of night. Let your gaze drift slowly upward now, away from the window, away from the warm glow of the hearth, toward the high places of the cabin, those quiet upper regions where the light grows dimmer and the shadows gather like soft sleeping cats. Above the main room of the cabin, suspended like a kind of gentle second world, hangs the loft. It is reached by a wooden ladder pegged into the wall beside the chimney. A ladder whose rungs have been worn smooth and slightly hollow by the climbing of small bare feet, by the descending of larger booted ones, by the long parade of every member of this household, ascending each night to the place where children dream. The ladder itself is a humble construction, made of 2 long poles of hickory with rungs of oak set between them, fastened with wooden pegs and a careful binding of rawhide. It leans at a gentle angle, not so steep that a child cannot climb it with confidence, not so shallow that it takes up more room than the cabin can spare. The rungs, when stepped upon, do not creak in the way that newer ladders sometimes do. They have settled into their positions over many years and now meet each foot with a kind of quiet welcome, the welcome of an old friend extending a familiar hand. If we climb the ladder slowly, taking each rung gently, we may peer up into the loft itself, where the air is warmer than below, for heat rises, of course, and the warmth of the hearth fire collects in this upper space like honey gathering in the bottom of a jar. The ceiling here is very low. A grown person could not stand upright but must move on hands and knees or crouch beneath the great roof beams that arch overhead. Yet for the children of the cabin, this low ceiling is a kind of cozy sky, just high enough for their small bodies, just close enough to touch when they raise their hands above their heads in sleepy wonder. The roof beams themselves are great peeled poles of cottonwood, set in pairs that meet at the ridge above. The bark has been carefully drawn off them, but the soft, golden grain of the wood remains, and where the firelight from below seeps upward through the small openings in the floor, the beams glow faintly as though lit from within. Between the beams the underside of the roof is visible, a tight thatch of split shingles laid in overlapping rows, each shingle hand-rived from a block of oak with a tool called a froe. There are perhaps 2,000 shingles upon this roof, and each one was made individually by a man sitting on a low stool beside a chopping block, splitting and shaving and stacking hour after hour, day after day, until at last the roof was complete and the rain could no longer find its way inside. Up here in the loft, the children sleep upon a long, low pallet that runs the length of the gable wall. The pallet is filled, like the bed below, with a tick of dried prairie grass, soft and faintly fragrant, and over it lie quilts of an even simpler design than the one downstairs. These are the everyday quilts, the work quilts made from scraps too small or too plain to be worked into the finer pieces. They are the colour of honest weather, of ploughed earth, of the brown of old leaves and the soft grey of rain clouds. They have been mended many times, and the mends themselves are works of careful patience. Small islands of contrasting fabric stitched neatly into the worn places, each one a record of a tear that was not abandoned but tended. At the head of the pallet, beneath the small triangular window cut into the gable, rests a wooden box no larger than a loaf of bread. Within it lie the children's small treasures, their secret wealth. A handful of smooth pebbles brought home from the creek bed, a feather from a flicker banded in soft brown and black, a piece of rose quartz the size of a thumbnail found in the dirt beside the garden, tiny carved horse whittled from a piece of basswood by the older brother for the younger sister upon a long winter evening, its proportions slightly imperfect, but its small wooden head bowed in a posture of perfect, eternal gentleness. These are the things that in the children's secret hearts mean the world is full of wonders. These are the things that when held in small hands beneath the soft quilt of sleep become the seeds of dreams. Beside the pallet, in a low corner where the roof slopes nearly to the floor, hangs a string of dried herbs from a hook in the beam. There is sage, gathered from the prairie itself, its leaves curled now into small silver-green commas, releasing into the warm loft air a faint peppery breath. There is a bundle of pennyroyal, used to keep the moths from the woolens in the trunk below. There is a sprig of lavender brought west in a packet of seeds by the grandmother 3 summers ago, now dried into pale purple stars whose perfume, in this still upper space, grows somehow stronger and sweeter than it ever was when fresh. In another corner of the loft stands a small wooden chest, its lid carved with the pattern of a simple tulip, the work of a long-ago craftsman in a country far across the sea. It is one of the few objects in the entire cabin that came not from this prairie but from another life, another world. Within it lies the family's small store of out-of-season clothing, folded carefully, dusted with crumbled cedar to keep the moths at bay, waiting for the change of weather. A heavy wool shawl, the colour of dried moss. A pair of woolen stockings knit by a great-aunt who has been gone these 20 years. A child's coat, slightly too small now, kept for the next child to grow into it, as has been the careful unspoken tradition of every family in every modest home for as long as families have existed. The light here in the loft is very dim. A single small candle set in a tin holder upon a low shelf would be more than sufficient to read by were anyone reading at this hour, but no one is. The children have not yet come up to bed, for the evening downstairs is still in its slow unfolding, and the loft waits, in its perfect and patient stillness, for the soft rustle of small bodies climbing up at last, for the gentle thud of a small head settling onto a pillow, for the long, slow exhale that marks the beginning of a child's untroubled sleep. Listen, even now, you can almost hear the silence of this place. It is a silence with texture, a silence with depth, a silence that contains within itself the slow ticking settling of the wooden beams as the night air cools, the faint whisper of the wind moving across the shingles above, the distant murmur of voices from the room below, indistinct, kindly, like the soft music of a dream remembered upon waking. Climb back down the ladder, gently taking each rung with careful slowness. The loft will keep its quiet vigil. The children, when at last they ascend, will find it waiting for them exactly as it has always been, exactly as it must always be, a small warm sky kept ready for the gentle business of dreaming. Now allow time itself to fold gently backward, the way one folds a soft cloth, and place us at the very beginning of a single ordinary day in this small cabin upon the plains. The hour is just before dawn. The world outside is still dark, but it is not the deep, total darkness of midnight. It is the lighter, more expectant darkness of the hour before sunrise, when the eastern sky has begun to soften ever so slightly from black to a deep indigo blue, when the morning star hangs above the horizon like a small patient lamp. Inside the cabin all is still hushed. The fire on the hearth has burned down to a deep bed of coals, glowing the colour of dark cherries beneath a fine ash of soft grey velvet. The cabin is cool but not cold, for the great stones of the chimney have stored within themselves the heat of the previous evening, and they release this heat now slowly throughout the long, dim hours before morning, like a careful animal sharing its warmth with a sleeping child. The first to wake is the mother of the household. She wakes without an alarm, without a clock, without any external prompt, for her body has long since attuned itself to the rhythms of this place. Some inner sense tells her that the eastern sky is paling, that the rooster will soon stir upon his perch in the small lean-to behind the cabin, that the day is preparing itself for its quiet beginning. She lies still for a moment beneath the heavy quilt, her eyes opening slowly into the dimness, taking in the familiar shapes of the room, the dark mass of the table, the pale square of the window, the faint glow of the coals upon the hearth. She rises gently, careful not to disturb her sleeping husband, and her bare feet meet the cool, smooth wood of the floor. She has done this thousands of times, and her body moves through the dimness with the unconscious grace of long practice. She knows exactly how many steps it is to the hearth. She knows exactly where the iron poker leans against the chimney stones. She knows exactly which floorboard creaks when stepped upon and how to shift her weight to avoid it. Her first task is the fire. She kneels upon the warm hearthstone and peers into the bed of coals. They are still alive, still glowing softly beneath their grey ash. She takes the poker and stirs them, gently breaking the ash crust, exposing the brighter embers beneath. She adds a small handful of dry kindling twigs and slivers of bark gathered the day before by the children, and the kindling catches almost at once, releasing tiny, eager flames that lick upward into the darkness of the chimney. She adds a slightly larger piece of wood, then another, and within a minute or two the fire has been brought back to bright, steady life. The room begins to warm, the shadows retreat into the corners, the day has begun. She fills the kettle from the wooden bucket beside the door, swings it over the fire on its iron crane, and stands for a moment watching the flames. The kettle is heavy, but she lifts it as easily as if it were a basket of feathers, for her arms have grown strong from years of just such liftings. While the water heats, she goes to the small cupboard beside the table and takes down the tin of ground coffee, opens it and breathes in, briefly, the deep, rich scent that rises from it. Coffee is a small luxury upon the prairie, traded for or saved for, and a single tin must last a long while. She measures the precious grounds carefully into the coffee pot. Outside, the sky has continued its slow paling. A faint pink has begun to suffuse the horizon, like the first blush upon a young girl's cheek. The rooster, sensing the approaching light, releases his first long brassy call, a sound that travels for nearly half a mile across the open grass. From within the lean-to, the soft lowing of the milk cow can be heard, a deep and patient sound, asking nothing, complaining of nothing, simply announcing her presence in the world. The mother takes her shawl from the peg by the door and steps outside. The air is sharp and cold and impossibly sweet. It smells of dew and of grass and of the deep cold earth beneath the grass. The sky above is a great paling vault of lavender and rose and the faintest gold at its eastern edge. Few stars still hang in the western half of the heavens, small and silver and slow to fade. The mother stands for a moment in the doorway, breathing this air, looking out across her small beloved kingdom of grass and sky, and she allows herself for one brief instant to feel the simple wonder of being alive at the edge of such a world. Then she takes up her milking pail from the hook by the door and walks the short distance to the lean-to. The cow greets her with a soft, recognizing huff. The milking stool is taken down from its peg. The mother sits upon it, leans her cheek against the warm flank of the cow, and begins her work. The milk arrives in long, rhythmic streams, ringing softly against the tin of the pail, gradually deepening in tone as the pail fills, the way the note of a struck bowl deepens as water is added to it. The cow's flank is warm against her cheek. The barn smells of clean straw and of the cow's sweet breath. The mother's hands work in a steady rhythm that is older than memory, older than language, the rhythm of every dawn that has ever been milked in every byre and barn, and lean-to since the first cow was first kept by the first patient hand. When the pail is full, she carries it carefully back to the cabin, the milk swaying gently within it, foam rising in soft white islands upon its surface. She sets it upon the table and covers it with a clean cloth, and the cloth dimples downward at its centre, where the warm milk has touched it. By now the husband has risen. He sits upon the edge of the bed, pulling on his boots, his face soft with the last lingering shapes of sleep. He nods to her. She nods to him. No words are needed at this hour. There is a quiet language between them, built across so many mornings, that is more eloquent than any speech. The children in the loft above have not yet stirred. They will sleep another half-hour perhaps until the smell of the cooking breakfast reaches them and pulls them gently from their dreams. The mother takes the iron skillet from its hook and sets it upon the hearth. She slices a thick rasher of bacon. She breaks 4 eggs into a wooden bowl. She mixes a small batch of biscuit dough, kneads it briefly upon the floured surface of the table, and pats it into rounds upon the soapstone of the hearth. The bacon begins to sizzle. The biscuits begin to brown, the coffee begins to send up its dark, fragrant steam. The eastern window has by now turned to gold. The first true ray of sunlight slants across the floor of the cabin, long and thin and almost solid in its golden density, and somewhere outside a meadowlark, the first of the morning, lifts its small head and pours forth its long, slow, sweet hymn to the new day. The children at last begin to wake. It is the smell that finds them first, drifting upward through the ladder hole in the loft floor, the warm, salty perfume of frying bacon mingled with the deeper, earthier scent of biscuits browning upon the hearth. They stir beneath their quilts, slowly the way small animals stir within their burrows when the seasons turn. There are 3 of them, nestled together upon the long pallet beneath the gable window. The eldest is a girl of perhaps 10, her hair, a long pale braid that has come undone in the night and now lies spread across the pillow like a fine tangled silk. Beside her sleeps her younger brother, a boy of 7, his face pressed into the pillow, his small fists tucked beneath his chin in the universal posture of children at deep rest. And at the very edge of the pallet, curled into the smallest possible shape, sleeps the youngest, a girl of 4, her cheek pink with warmth, her tiny mouth slightly open in the soft astonishment of dreams. The eldest is the first to open her eyes. She looks up at the underside of the roof, at the rough golden grain of the cottonwood beams, at the faint slants of pale morning light slipping in between the shingles. For a moment she is not quite sure whether she is still dreaming. The world above her seems both perfectly familiar and slightly mysterious, as it does to anyone who wakes slowly into a beloved place. She turns her head and sees her brother and sister still sleeping, and she feels in her small chest a soft and protective warmth toward them, the kind of warmth older sisters have felt for younger siblings since the very beginning of the world. She slips out from beneath the quilt, and her bare feet touch the boards of the loft floor. The wood is cool but not cold. She gathers her dress from the peg beside the pallet. The same simple cotton dress she wore yesterday, washed last week in the great wooden tub behind the cabin, and hung to dry upon the line strung between two cottonwood posts. The dress is the colour of pale, sun-faded butter, with a small print of even paler blue flowers, and it slips over her head with a soft whisper of fabric. She buttons it slowly, beginning at the bottom and working upward, her small fingers moving with the careful concentration of someone who has only recently mastered this morning task. She kneels by her brother and gently shakes his shoulder. He stirs, mumbles something into the pillow, and turns his face toward her. His eyes open, see her, and crinkle into a sleepy smile. She helps him sit up. She helps him find his shirt and his small woolen breeches. The youngest, sensing the absence of warmth beside her, opens her own eyes and reaches up her arms to be lifted. The eldest gathers her up, blanket and all, and the three of them descend the ladder together, the older girl steadying the younger upon her hip, the small brother climbing carefully behind, his bare toes finding each rung with the easy confidence of long habit. Down in the warm-lit kitchen, the mother greets them with a soft smile. She does not speak loudly at this hour, for the morning is still tender and the world is still being gently coaxed into wakefulness. She lifts the youngest into her arms, kisses the warm, sleep-flushed cheek, and sets her upon the bench at the table. She helps the boy with his suspenders, which he has somehow managed to twist into an impossible knot during the night. She braids the eldest girl's pale hair with quick, practised fingers, 3 strands flowing into one another in a smooth and unhurried rhythm. The breakfast is laid upon the table in simple, generous portions. There is the bacon crisped golden brown, its small pool of fat soaking into a tin plate. There are the biscuits, hot from the hearth, split open and steaming, with a small dish of butter beside them and a jar of wild plum preserves the children helped pick last August. There is a mug of fresh milk for each child, still slightly warm from the cow, with a faint sweet head of foam upon its surface, and for the mother and father there is the precious coffee, dark and fragrant in tin cups, sweetened with a tiny spoonful of brown sugar. The family bows their heads. The father speaks a soft, brief grace, thanking the Maker for the food, for the morning, for the safety of the night just past. His voice is low and unhurried. He has spoken these words, or some close variation of them, every single morning for as long as he can remember. The children fold their small hands and listen. When the grace is finished, they all look up, smile at each other, and begin to eat. The youngest cannot quite manage her biscuit on her own, and must be helped. The boy, ravenous as boys of his age tend to be, eats with a focused attention that brooks no distraction. The eldest girl, more composed, breaks her biscuit carefully into small pieces and dips them into the warm milk. The father, between bites, mentions softly to the mother that the corn in the lower field looks ready for hoeing. The mother nods. They will do that work together this afternoon, while the eldest girl watches the younger ones at their play. After breakfast, the children have their small chores. The boy is sent out with a wooden bucket to bring fresh water from the creek, a journey of perhaps a quarter-mile each way, which he undertakes with the small, serious dignity of one entrusted with an important task. The eldest girl helps her mother wash the breakfast dishes in a basin of hot water, drying each tin plate and wooden bowl with a soft cloth and stacking them carefully upon the shelf above the table. The youngest, too small for real chores, is given the gentle task of feeding the chickens, which she does with a wooden bowl of corn cradled against her stomach, scattering the kernels into the dust with small, generous handfuls, while the chickens cluck and bob and bustle around her bare feet in their busy, important way. When the chores are done, there is time, before the heat of the day has fully arrived, for play. The children have no manufactured toys save for a single rag doll that the eldest girl carries with her, a doll with embroidered eyes and yarn hair the colour of wheat, named after the grandmother who sewed her many years ago. But the prairie itself is their great, endless playground. They run through the tall grass which closes behind them like green water, and the boy pretends to be a hunter stalking some imaginary buffalo with a stick for a rifle. The girls gather the small purple flowers of the prairie clover, weaving them into crowns and bracelets, decorating each other with great seriousness, making themselves into small prairie queens beneath the wide blue sky. There is a low knoll behind the cabin, perhaps 20 feet high, that the children have named the Great Mountain. They climb to its summit and survey their kingdom, and from up there, the cabin looks small and snug and perfect, its chimney sending up a thin grey ribbon of smoke, its window catching the morning light, its small garden stretched out beside it like a green and faithful companion. The world from up there seems infinite. The world from up there seems entirely good. Step out now gently through the cabin door and follow the small, well-worn footpath that leads around to the southern side of the dwelling, where the family's garden lies in a careful, patient rectangle beneath the morning sun. The path itself is a soft trough of bare earth, beaten into the prairie by the comings and goings of bare feet and booted ones, a small, faithful river of dust that connects the cabin to its essential outer territories. As you walk along it, the long grass on either side brushes lightly against your knees, leaving traces of dew upon your skirts or your trousers, and the ground beneath your feet feels cool and slightly springy, the way well-trodden earth feels in the early hours of a summer day. The garden, when it comes into view, is perhaps 30 paces long and 20 paces wide, fenced about with a low palisade of split willow stakes lashed together with rawhide, humble barrier meant less to keep things out than to mark the gentle boundary between the wilderness of the prairie and the cultivated tenderness of the family's own small Eden. Within this rectangle, in long parallel rows, the vegetables grow. The corn rises tallest, of course, already higher than a man's head in the back row, its long ribbon-like leaves rustling softly against one another in the morning breeze. Each stalk is a small column of green, banded with paler stripes where the sheaths overlap, and from each stalk hangs the soft golden tassel of the corn silk, drying now, turning slowly to the colour of brown sugar. The ears beneath the silk are growing fat, their husks tight and pale green, their kernels swelling within in slow, patient arithmetic. To walk between the rows of corn is to enter a small green cathedral, where the light is filtered to a soft watery gold, and the whisper of the leaves is like the soft turning of 1,000 pages. In the next row grow the beans, climbing in graceful spirals up the tall poles of cottonwood that have been driven into the earth as their support. The bean leaves are wide and heart-shaped, the colour of a dark, polished emerald, and among them dangle the slim green pods, some no longer than a child's finger, others as long as a grown man's hand, their walls firm and faintly furred with the softest down. When the wind moves through the bean rows, the leaves rustle in a different voice from the corn, a softer, more whispering sound like the murmur of distant water. Then come the squash, sprawling lavishly across the warm earth in a great green tapestry of broad leaves and twining vines. The leaves are enormous, some as wide across as a dinner plate, their surfaces covered with tiny, faintly stinging hairs. Beneath them hide the squashes themselves, in various stages of growth. Some are still pale green, still hidden, still no larger than a child's fist. Others are full and glossy, the colour of dark forest moss, ready to be lifted and brought into the cabin for the night's stew. And some set aside for the long winter ahead, are still small and round and faintly orange, slowly maturing into the deep, rich pumpkins that will hang in the cellar through the cold months. In the row beyond the squash, the potato plants grow in dense, low mounds of dark leaves dotted with tiny lavender flowers. Beneath the soil, hidden from sight, the potatoes themselves are slowly forming, fattening, gathering their starchy treasure in the cool darkness. To dig them up, when the time comes, is always a small surprise, a kind of buried gold revealed by the prongs of a wooden fork. Beside the potatoes grow the herbs and salad greens. There is a row of lettuce, its leaves crinkled and pale green, just on the cusp of being too old, just sweet enough still to be picked for the noon meal. There is a row of small green onions, their thin, hollow leaves rising upward like a gathering of flutes. There is a patch of sage, its leaves silvery and pungent, releasing into the warm morning air a strong peppery breath whenever a hand brushes against it. There is a clump of dill, its feathery fronds the palest green, swaying gently in the breeze, and a row of carrots, whose lacy tops belie the sweet orange fingers buried in the soil below. Each of these plants is tended carefully by the mother and the eldest daughter, who weed between the rows in the cool of the morning and water the drier patches with buckets carried from the creek, when the rains have been absent for too long. At the far edge of the garden against the willow fence grow a pair of berry bushes transplanted 3 summers ago from the wild thickets along the creek. They are gooseberries, prickly and modest, their pale green fruit hanging like tiny translucent lanterns beneath the leaves. The berries will be picked in their ripe season with care and many small scratches upon the picker's hands, and they will be stewed into a tart preserve that will brighten the bread of many a winter morning. To the left of the garden, in a separate small enclosure of woven willow, lies the chicken yard. There are perhaps a dozen hens here, plus a single rooster, all of them descendants of the original 3 hens and 1 rooster the family brought west in a wicker crate 4 summers ago. The hens are of a variety the pioneers called barred Plymouth Rocks, their feathers patterned with delicate black and white bars that from a distance blend into a soft smoky grey. They move about the yard in a constant busy bustle, pecking at the earth, scratching backward with their yellow feet, releasing now and then small contented clucks and murmurs that form a kind of low, gentle music. The rooster, taller and more brilliant than his hens, is coloured in deep oranges and bronzes, with iridescent green-black tail feathers that catch the morning light like polished oil. He patrols the yard with a slow, kingly dignity, occasionally pausing to crow, his head thrown back, his small chest expanded, his voice carrying out across the prairie in proud trumpeting waves. The chicken house itself is a low, simple structure of split logs with a slanted roof of cedar shakes and a small door at one end through which the hens enter and exit. Inside, the air is dim and faintly sweet with the smell of clean straw and feathers. Along one wall is a row of nesting boxes, each one filled with fresh hay, and within several of these boxes lie the morning's eggs, still warm, their shells pale brown and smooth as polished river stones. The eldest daughter gathers them now into a small basket, lifting each egg with great gentleness, for an egg on the prairie is a small treasure, a thing not to be carelessly broken. The garden and the chickens taken together are the slow heart of the family's daily sustenance. Without the garden there would be no fresh vegetables for the table. Without the chickens, no eggs for the morning, no occasional Sunday hen for the pot, no soft feathers for the future pillows of children yet unborn. To tend these things is to tend the family's life itself in its most direct and elemental form, and to walk among them in the cool of a summer morning, with the dew still beading on the bean leaves and the rooster announcing the hour from his post atop the chicken house, is to feel oneself at the very centre of a small, complete, perfectly balanced world. When the sun climbs at last to its high, hot zenith, and the shadows beneath the cabin shrink to small dark pools directly below the eaves, the family pauses in its labour. The morning's work has been good, the corn has been hoed, the lower row of weeds turned under into the dark, fertile earth. The water buckets stand full beside the door. The eggs have been gathered and set in the cool of the spring house, where they will keep for many days. The mother has hung a fresh wash upon the line, and the white cotton sheets billow gently in the noon breeze like the soft, slow flags of some peaceful and unhurried country. It is time for the noon meal, what the pioneers called dinner, the largest and most important meal of the day. The mother has been preparing it during the late morning, while the others worked outside, and now the cabin is filled with the slow, layered fragrance of food being made with patience and care. In the iron kettle hanging over the hearth simmers a stew of beans and salt pork, cooked slowly since the early morning, until the beans have grown soft and creamy, and the broth has thickened into a rich, savoury liquor. The salt pork has rendered most of its fat into the stew, where it now floats in tiny golden coins upon the surface, and the beans themselves have absorbed the deep, smoky flavour of the meat. Handful of dried tomatoes, saved from last summer's harvest, has been added near the end of the cooking, lending the stew a faint, sweet brightness. A few stalks of fresh dill from the garden lie upon the surface, releasing their delicate fragrance into the rising steam. Upon the soapstone hearth bakes a great round of cornbread, golden and crusted, the size of a wagon wheel, fragrant with the sweet, faintly nutty perfume of fresh cornmeal. The corn for this bread was ground only yesterday, between the two heavy stones of the family's small hand mill, and the flavour of it is therefore extraordinarily fresh, almost grassy, almost floury. The crust is the colour of dark amber, and when the mother taps it lightly with her knuckle, it returns the small hollow sound that bakers since the beginning of bread have understood as the signal that all is well. Beside the cornbread, upon a tin plate, lies a pat of fresh butter, churned by the eldest daughter only an hour ago. The butter is the colour of pale primrose, soft and faintly glistening, dotted with tiny crystals of salt. Beside the butter sits a small earthenware bowl of wild honey, harvested last autumn from a hollow tree along the creek by the father, who climbed the tree in long sleeves and a leather hood, with a smoking torch of damp moss to gentle the bees. The honey is dark, almost the colour of strong tea, and it carries within it the deep, complex perfume of every wildflower that bloomed within a mile of that tree. Upon a wooden trencher rests a wedge of cheese, made by the mother from the surplus milk of the past week. It is a soft, fresh cheese, white as new snow, faintly tangy, tied in a square of muslin and pressed beneath a stone for 2 days until it firmed into its proper texture. Beside the cheese, in a wooden bowl, lies a small heap of green onions and radishes from the garden, washed in cold spring water and gleaming like jewels. The family gathers around the long oak table. The father sits at the head, the mother to his right, the children arrayed along the bench opposite him. The youngest is lifted onto the bench and given a small extra cushion of folded apron upon which to perch. Each member receives a wooden bowl, a tin spoon, and a small wooden trencher upon which to set the bread and cheese. The father offers a quiet grace somewhat longer than the morning's, thanking the Maker not only for the food but for the strength of the morning's labour, for the health of the family, for the gentle weather, for the rain that fell 3 days ago which has now entered the corn and made it grow. The children fold their hands and listen with the patient seriousness that children give to the rituals of grown people. The youngest, despite herself, peeks once at the cornbread upon the table, then quickly closes her eyes again, stifling a small secret smile. When the grace is finished, the meal begins. The mother ladles the stew into each bowl. The father slices the cornbread into thick golden wedges and passes them down the bench. The cheese is divided. The butter is spread. The honey, that rare and precious sweetness, is offered last, and each child receives a small spoonful upon a piece of bread, which they eat slowly, savouring it, knowing that such a treat does not come every day. For a while there is mostly silence at the table, the comfortable silence of hungry people doing serious justice to a good meal. There is the soft clink of spoons against tin bowls. There is the gentle crunch of a radish bitten through. There is the small contented hum that the boy makes whenever he eats something he particularly likes, a hum so quiet that it is barely audible, but which is a constant feature of every meal he has ever sat down to. Outside, beyond the open door, a cicada has begun its long, slow afternoon song, a high, droning music that rises and falls in slow waves, the very sound of summer noon upon the plains. When the meal is finished, when the bowls have been wiped clean with the last crusts of cornbread, when the cheese has been pared down to a small modest remnant, when the honey jar has been carefully closed and set back upon its shelf, the family rests. This is the quiet hour, the hour of midday repose, when the heat outside is too great for hard labour, and the body asks for a small restorative pause. The father takes his pipe from the mantel and steps out to sit upon the bench beneath the window. He lights the pipe with a small ember from the hearth, drawing the flame down into the bowl with patient breaths, and the rich, sweet smoke rises around his head in slow blue curls. He gazes out across his fields, his eyes soft, his thoughts slow and unhurried. The mother sits in the rocking chair beside the hearth, a piece of mending in her lap, her needle moving in small, peaceful arcs. The eldest daughter takes a book down from the shelf above the mantel, a small, well-worn volume of Bible stories with simple woodcut illustrations, and she reads to her younger siblings in a soft, careful voice, sounding out the longer words with the slow concentration of a child who has only recently come into the great inheritance of reading. The boy lies upon the rag rug before the hearth, his head propped upon his hand, listening. The youngest curls into her mother's lap and slowly, slowly drifts toward the soft, brief sleep of midday. The cabin breathes. The cicadas drone. The sunlight slants through the window in long golden bars. And the world for a little while is held in the perfect, patient suspension of a noontime that will, in the fullness of memory, seem to have lasted forever. When the heat of midday begins slowly to lift, when the long shadows of the cottonwood trees beside the creek begin to lengthen once again toward the east, the family rouses itself from the quiet hour and returns to the gentle ongoing work of the afternoon. The labor of these hours is different from the morning's labor. The morning belongs to the great urgent tasks of the farm, to milking and weeding and water carrying. The afternoon belongs to the slower, more meditative crafts, to the patient handwork that turns raw materials into the fabric of daily life. The mother takes her seat in the rocking chair beside the window where the light falls best for fine work, and she places her sewing basket upon the small stool at her side. The basket itself is a beautiful object, woven of sweet grass by a Pawnee woman who passed through the territory 2 summers ago, and it still carries within its tightly braided coils a faint, sweet vegetable fragrance that mingles pleasantly with the smells of the cabin. Within the basket lie the implements of her craft. There are needles of various sizes kept in a small pincushion shaped like a strawberry, embroidered red with a green calyx of stem. There are spools of thread in muted colours, the white and ivory and pale blue and dark brown of practical mending. There are small scraps of fabric, carefully folded, saved for patches and trims. There is a tiny pair of brass-handled scissors, kept polished by use, their blades worn slightly thin from many sharpenings. And there is a small thimble of pewter, dented faintly upon its top from 1,000 small pressures. She is mending a tear in the boy's good shirt, the one he wears on Sundays and at gatherings, a tear made yesterday when he slipped while climbing the cottonwood tree behind the cabin and caught his sleeve upon a broken branch. The tear is in the shape of an L, jagged and irregular, perhaps 2 inches in length. She turns the shirt inside out, smooths the torn fabric upon her lap, and selects from her basket a small scrap of similar cotton. With the patience of long practice, she pins the patch in place, threads her needle with a length of fine ivory thread, and begins to set the tiny stitches that will draw the tear closed. Watch her hands as she works. They are not delicate hands, they are the hands of a woman who has carried buckets and split kindling and kneaded bread and pulled weeds and gentled animals and rocked babies. They are broad across the palm with strong knuckles and short, clean nails. Yet, despite their strength, they move with extraordinary delicacy when the work calls for it. The needle dips into the cloth, rises, dips again in a rhythm so regular that it seems almost mechanical, although it is, of course, the deepest opposite of that. Each stitch is a small decision made by an alert and practiced mind. Each stitch is precisely the same length as the one before it. The thread tightens just so, neither pulling the fabric into a pucker nor leaving the stitch loose enough to fail. The work is invisible art, hidden art, art that will be appreciated only by those who never see it. For the goal of the mending is to make the repair vanish into the original cloth, to restore the shirt as nearly as possible to its prior unbroken state. Beside her, upon the rag rug, the eldest daughter sits cross-legged, learning the craft. She has been given an old square of fabric upon which to practice her stitches, a piece of muslin that bears the faint rectangular outlines of many earlier lessons. She is working today on a row of running stitches, a basic stitch but one which must be perfectly even to be of any real use. Her brow is furrowed with concentration. Her tongue protrudes very slightly from the corner of her mouth, the way it always does when she is working hard at something. Her stitches are not yet as even as her mother's. Some are slightly larger, some slightly smaller, but they are improving, slowly, day by day, and her mother glances over from time to time and offers a quiet word of guidance, and the girl receives the guidance gravely, and she returns to her work with renewed care. Across the room, the boy has been given a different sort of task. He sits upon the small wooden stool near the door, with a piece of basswood across his knees and a small whittling knife in his hand. His father has set him to practicing the carving of simple shapes. Today he is attempting a tiny wooden spoon, and the spoon is not, in truth, going particularly well. The bowl of it is too thick on one side and too thin on the other, and the handle is slightly crooked. But he persists with the patient, frowning concentration of a boy determined to master a craft, and the small white shavings curl from his blade and fall like soft petals onto the floor around him. The father, meanwhile, has gone to the small lean-to behind the cabin where his workbench is and where the more involved work of the household is done. The bench is a sturdy slab of oak, scarred and ringed with the marks of 1,000 projects, and above it, hung upon wooden pegs, are the father's tools. There is the broadaxe with its great curved blade and its short heavy handle. There is the adzer for shaping timbers. There is the draw knife with its 2 wooden grips used for stripping bark and smoothing curves. There are augers for boring holes and chisels for fine cutting, and a small hand plane, whose blade is so sharp that it can take from a board a shaving as thin and curling as a ribbon of silk. This afternoon the father is repairing a broken spoke on the wagon wheel, which suffered yesterday when the wagon passed over a rough patch of ground in the lower field. The wheel itself stands propped against the bench, and the broken spoke has already been removed. He has selected a fresh piece of seasoned hickory, long set aside for just such a need, and he is shaping it now with the draw knife, peeling away the wood in long smooth strokes, judging the thickness by eye and by feel. The shavings curl onto the floor of the lean-to and release into the warm afternoon air. The sharp, peppery fragrance of fresh-cut hickory, a smell so distinctive and so pleasant that it lingers in the lean-to for hours after the work is done. When the spoke is shaped, he will fit it into the hub of the wheel, drive it home with careful taps of a wooden mallet, and bind the wheel with a fresh iron rim, heated red-hot in the small forge beside the lean-to and dropped hissing over the wood, where it will tighten as it cools and pull every joint of the wheel into perfect unyielding union. This is patient work, deliberate work, work that cannot be hurried without ruin, and in the doing of it the father thinks of nothing else. His mind is entirely upon the wood, the iron, the curve, the fit. There is a kind of meditation in this, a kind of quiet prayer, the prayer of work done well, the prayer of a man returning a broken thing, gently to wholeness. The afternoon, you see, full of these small, careful makings, and in their accumulation, day after day, year after year, entire civilization is sustained. When the sun begins at last its slow descent toward the western horizon, when the light upon the prairie takes on the deep, mellow gold of a long-aged honey, when the shadows of the cottonwoods stretch eastward across the grass like dark, peaceful fingers, the family gathers itself once more inward, toward the cabin, toward the hearth, toward the slow, gentle ceremony of evening. The work of the day is largely finished. The chickens have been counted and shut into their coop against the coming night. The cow has been milked once more, her evening milk carried in carefully and set in the cool of the spring house. The garden has been watered. The wagon wheel has been mended and now stands ready for tomorrow's work. The shirt has been repaired and folded. The boy's wooden spoon, slightly improved over its earlier shape, has been set upon the mantel for further consideration. The tools have been wiped clean and returned to their pegs. The lean-to has been swept. The day, in all its small particulars, has been quietly put away. The mother turns now to the preparation of the supper, which will be a lighter meal than the noon dinner. For the body in the evening asks not for great quantities of food, but for warmth, comfort, and the soft taste of sweet, mild things. She slices a cold ham from the cellar into thin pink rounds. She takes a half-dozen eggs from the morning's gathering and scrambles them gently in the iron skillet, cooking them slowly until they form soft, pale curds that gleam faintly in the firelight. She warms the leftover cornbread upon the hearthstone, and she sets out a small pitcher of fresh, sweet milk and a jar of the wild plum preserves the children helped to make last autumn. While she cooks, the father lights the lamps. There are 3 of them in the cabin. The largest is the lantern that hangs from the central beam above the table, a brass kerosene lantern with a polished glass chimney and a wick of cotton ribbon. Lighting it is a small ceremony unto itself. The father lifts the chimney carefully, sets a lit splint of wood to the wick, watches the small blue flame catch and grow into a warm yellow flower, then lowers the chimney back into place. The light blooms outward across the cabin, gentle and golden, casting soft, elongated shadows upon the walls. The second lamp is a smaller oil lamp set upon the mantel, used by the mother for her sewing in the long winter evenings. The third is a tin candle holder kept beside the bed, used only when someone must rise in the night. Together, the lamps fill the cabin with a soft, warm, layered illumination, the kind of light that flatters every face and softens every edge. There are no harsh shadows in this light, no glaring reflections, only a slow golden glow that breathes and pulses gently in time with the wicks. The family gathers at the table, the supper is laid out. There is the cold ham, the warm scrambled eggs, the cornbread, the milk, the preserves. The father offers another quiet grace, this one even briefer than the noons, and then the family eats. The conversation is gentle now, slower, more reflective. The day is being quietly summed up. The father mentions the wagon wheel, holds up his hand and sights along it, declares with quiet satisfaction that it will hold. The mother mentions that the bean rows are looking strong, and that they will likely have their first picking within a week. The eldest girl recounts a small incident from her hour of garden work, an encounter with a praying mantis upon a tomato vine. The strange green elegance of the creature, the way it turned its triangular head to regard her with apparent intelligence. The boy describes with great seriousness the progress of his wooden spoon. The youngest, sleepy already, leans against her mother's arm, and contributes nothing to the conversation but the soft, slow breathing of a child for whom the day has been long and full. After supper, the dishes are cleared. The mother and the eldest daughter wash them in the basin, dry them, and stack them on the shelf. The father takes his pipe again to the bench outside, where he sits for a quarter-hour, watching the last red light fade from the western sky, watching the first stars emerge, one by one in the deepening blue overhead, listening to the slow evening sounds of the prairie. Nighthawk calls high above, a coyote yips far away. The wind, which has blown all day, has fallen now to the merest whisper, and the long grass stands almost still. Inside the cabin, the family gathers around the hearth. The mother takes up her knitting, a half-finished pair of woolen socks for the father's winter wear. The eldest daughter brings out the family Bible and lays it open on her lap. The boy lies upon the rag rug, his head pillowed upon his crossed arms, gazing up into the low golden ceiling. The youngest, already nearly asleep, climbs into her father's lap when he comes back inside, and curls there like a small warm animal seeking its den. The eldest daughter reads aloud from the Bible, a chapter chosen, as is the family custom, by the rotation of the days. Her voice is clear and unhurried, slightly sing-song in the manner of a child reading aloud. But she has been doing this for several years now, and her reading is quite good. The words of the old text, polished by centuries of use, fall into the warm cabin air with a kind of soft ancient music. The family listens, the fire crackles softly. A log settles deeper into the bed of coals with a small, tired sigh. When the chapter is finished, the eldest girl closes the Bible carefully and sets it back upon the mantel. The mother begins to sing, very softly, a hymn she has known since her own childhood, a hymn whose melody is older than memory. Her voice is not large, but it is sweet, and the song fills the cabin like a slow, gentle breath. The father joins in on the second verse, his voice low and deep, providing a kind of warm foundation to her higher line. The eldest daughter joins on the third verse, and her younger brother, though he does not always remember the words, joins on the fourth, humming softly in the spaces where his memory fails him. The youngest in her father's arms has now drifted entirely into sleep. When the hymn is finished, a long, soft silence settles over the cabin. It is a full silence, a peaceful silence, a silence that contains within itself the complete and finished day. The mother glances at the youngest and smiles. The father carries the small sleeping girl gently to her place on the loft pallet, climbs the ladder slowly, lays her down upon the soft tick of grass, draws the quilt up over her tiny shoulders, and pauses for a moment to watch her breathe. Below, the eldest daughter and her brother prepare for bed. They wash their faces in the basin, change into their nightshirts, and begin their own slow climb to the loft. The mother banks the fire for the night, drawing the ash carefully over the coals to keep them alive until morning. The lamp is dimmed, then extinguished, and the cabin, breath by gentle breath, settles into the soft, complete stillness of a country night. But of course no single day, however lovely, can tell the full story of life within these wooden walls. The pioneer cabin upon the Great Plains is a creature of the seasons, and to know it truly one must understand how it changes, how it breathes, how it adjusts itself slowly and patiently to the great wheel of the year as it turns above the prairie sky. In the spring, the cabin begins to wake from its long winter slumber. The snow that has banked itself against the northern wall through the cold months begins to melt, slowly at first, then more rapidly, drawing the brown earth back into view in widening patches. The thawing ground releases its long-held perfumes, the rich, dark scent of damp soil, the faintly sweet smell of last year's grasses returning to the earth, the green, almost electric fragrance of the first new shoots pushing upward through the moist clay. The cabin's small window, shut tight against the winter's cold, is opened at last, and the first soft breeze of true spring enters the room, carrying with it the mingled smells of melting snow and rising sap and the distant, hopeful music of returning birds. In April, the family throws open the door each morning to air the cabin. The mother sweeps out the winter's accumulated dust, the small fragments of bark and ash that have collected behind the woodbox, the soft grey feathers of the chickens that have somehow found their way indoors, the dried petals of the autumn flowers that stood in the green pottery jar upon the mantel through the cold months. She washes the floor with hot water and a strong soap of her own making, lye, and rendered tallow boiled together in the great iron kettle behind the cabin. The boards gleam afterward with a fresh pale brightness, and the cabin smells for a time of soap and water and damp wood, the clean austere smell of a house being made new. The first ploughing of the spring is a great event, eagerly anticipated through the long, dim weeks of winter. The father walks his fields in the early days of April, judging the readiness of the soil by feel, taking up handfuls of earth and crumbling them between his fingers, sniffing them, watching how they hold their shape or fall apart. When at last the soil is right, when it is moist but no longer wet, when it falls cleanly from the hand without clumping, the plough is brought out from the lean-to where it has rested all winter beneath an oilcloth. The horse, or in some years the patient ox, is harnessed. The first long furrow is opened. The earth turns over in a slow rolling wave, dark and gleaming and alive with the small white roots of the previous year's grass. The smell of the freshly turned soil is one of the great perfumes of the prairie spring, a smell at once dark and bright, ancient and infinitely new. In the summer, the cabin enters its season of greatest abundance. The garden grows lavishly, the cornfields rise tall and green. The wild prairie itself becomes a riot of bloom, the great yellow heads of the sunflowers turning to follow the slow march of the sun, the deep magenta of the prairie lily punctuating the long grass, the small white stars of yarrow scattered like quiet constellations across the meadows. The cabin's door stands open through most of the day, allowing the warm, scented air to drift through the rooms, and the children spend their afternoons largely outdoors, returning only for meals and for sleep. The summer is also the season of the great storms which sweep across the prairie with magnificent and humbling power. The clouds gather themselves in the western sky, slow and tall, building into great purple cathedrals that climb miles into the heavens. The light beneath them turns yellow, then green, then a strange, almost luminous bronze. The wind rises, the grass bends low, and then the rain comes in heavy, slanting sheets, drumming upon the roof of the cabin in a long, sustained roar, dripping from the eaves in sparkling cascades, gathering in pools upon the bare earth around the dwelling, releasing into the air the deep, dark, electric scent of wet soil and lightning-charged sky. Inside the cabin, the family gathers close to the hearth and waits out the storm in patient silence, listening to its great voice, watching the small flashes of light through the window, knowing that when it has passed, the world outside will be washed clean and the air will be sweet for many hours. In the autumn, the cabin enters its season of harvest, and the rhythms of life accelerate into a beautiful, ordered urgency. The corn must be brought in. The squashes must be cured upon the roof of the lean-to where they bake in the slow autumn sun until their rinds harden into a long-keeping armour. The beans must be picked and shelled and dried for the winter. The herbs from the garden must be gathered into bundles and hung from the roof beams of the cabin to dry. The wild plums along the creek must be picked at their precise moment of ripeness and turned into preserves. The hogs must be slaughtered and the meat smoked and salted in the smokehouse beyond the lean-to. The cabin during these autumn weeks smells differently than it does at any other time of year. There is the deep, earthy fragrance of pumpkins and squashes ripening upon the hearth. There is the sharp, sweet perfume of apples being pared and sliced and laid out upon racks to dry. There is the clean, peppery smell of dill being hung in bundles for winter pickles. There is the slow, smoky breath of the smokehouse drifting in through the open door. The cabin becomes, for these few weeks, a great slow factory of preservation, in which the entire abundance of the warm months is patiently translated into the steady provender of the cold ones to come. And then at last comes winter. The first snow falls, usually in late November, in soft, hesitant flakes that the children watch with wonder through the small window. The garden falls silent beneath a white blanket. The creek begins to freeze at its edges, the ice spreading slowly inward from the banks. The wild geese pass overhead in their long V-shaped formations, their distant calls drifting down to the cabin like the music of farewell. The cabin itself draws inward upon its own warmth. The door is shut more often. The window is sometimes covered with the oiled paper. The chinking is checked carefully and any new cracks are filled. The wood pile, stacked all summer along the northern wall, begins its long, slow, satisfying decline. Inside, the winter brings its own deep pleasures. There are the long evenings of storytelling beside the fire. There are the slow, patient projects of the cold months, the quilting, the carving, the spinning. There are the rare, beautiful days of fresh snow when the world outside lies still and white and silent under a sky the colour of old pewter. There is the deep animal contentment of being warm and dry and well fed while the wind howls across the prairie outside. And so the year turns, and so the cabin lives. Each season pours itself into the cabin's small space, and the cabin holds it and lets it go, and prepares itself for the next. This is the slow, deep music of pioneer life, the music of the great wheel turning, the music of a life lived in patient harmony with the eternal rhythms of the earth. Sit with me a while, here beside the dimming hearth, while the small fire breathes its long, slow breaths, and the cabin settles deeper into the gentle silence of evening. I would like, if you will allow it, to speak softly of larger things, of the meaning perhaps of a place such as this, of what it means to belong somewhere, of what it means in the long arc of a human life to call a small wooden room one's home. There is something almost mysterious about this little cabin and the way it gathers a family unto itself. From the outside, viewed across the wide ocean of grass, it is nothing more than a small dark rectangle, a humble handmade box of logs perched upon the shoulder of an immense and indifferent prairie. The wind does not particularly notice it. The clouds drift overhead without reverence. The migrating geese pass above it without pause. To the great patient indifference of the land itself, this cabin is a tiny, almost negligible thing. And yet, to the people who live within its walls, this cabin is the very centre of the universe. Every direction, every distance, every other place is measured from here. The creek lies a quarter-mile to the west of the cabin. The neighbours are 5 miles to the east. The town is a full day's wagon ride to the north. The graveyard, where lie those few who have not lived to see another spring, is 1/2 mile to the south, on the rise where the wild plums grow. Every map of meaning that this family carries within them begins, always with the cabin at its centre, with the small dark rectangle from which all other places fan outward in their slow ordered rings. This is perhaps what it means to belong somewhere, not to own it in the legal sense, though this family has indeed put their name upon the land and signed the papers in the distant courthouse. No, belonging is a deeper thing than ownership. Belonging is the slow, patient knitting of one's own daily life into the fabric of a particular place, until the place and the life become so woven together that they cannot be separated without grief. Look at the door of this cabin. The handle is worn smooth and slightly hollow, polished by 10,000 graspings of the same hands. The threshold is grooved gently downward in the place where boots have crossed it most often. The hinges have settled into their precise positions and now swing the door upon a path that no other door has ever quite travelled. To live in such a place is to inscribe oneself upon it, slowly, day by day, until it bears the soft signature of one's own bodily existence. And the place in turn inscribes itself upon you. Your hands grow collused in particular ways shaped by the particular tools you take up each morning. Your eyes grow accustomed to particular distances, to the particular slant of the light at particular hours. Your ears grow attuned to particular sounds. The wind across the chimney, the creak of the floor in the loft, the call of the rooster from his accustomed perch. After enough years of this slow, mutual inscribing, the place becomes a kind of extension of oneself, and oneself becomes a kind of extension of the place. To leave such a home would not be merely to move. It would be a kind of small dismemberment, parting of one's body from itself. This surely is one of the great lost truths of our modern age, when so many people move so often and live, in some sense, nowhere in particular. The pioneer family understood, by the simple necessity of their circumstance, that a home is not built quickly. A home is grown the way a tree is grown, slowly, ring by ring, season by patient season. The first year in the cabin it was merely a shelter, a place to sleep and eat and wait out the weather. The second year it began to be familiar, the patterns of light and shadow learned, the small sounds of its settling memorized. The third year it began to be loved, the fourth year it began to be necessary. By the 10th year it was no longer a building but a being, no longer a shelter but a soul, no longer something the family possessed but something they belonged to deeply, inseparably, the way a person belongs to the body they were born within. There is a kind of grace in this, a grace that the modern world has largely forgotten. We have come perhaps to think of homes as commodities, as boxes that can be exchanged for other boxes when our circumstances change. But the pioneer, gazing out across the great empty grass at his small log cabin, knew that this was not in truth a commodity. It was the only home he had, the only home he might ever have, the place where his children had been born, the place where his parents might come to spend their final years, the place where, in the fullness of time, his own bones would be laid to rest beneath the prairie sod. To such a person the cabin was sacred, in the deepest and oldest sense of that word. It was set apart, it was bound up with everything that gave his life meaning. And so, dear listener, as we sit here in the dim glow of these embers, in the soft amber light of these patient lamps, in the great hush of this prairie evening, perhaps we might allow ourselves to remember for just a moment what it felt like to belong somewhere this completely. Perhaps, in the soft chambers of memory, you have known such a place yourself. A grandmother's kitchen, a childhood bedroom, a garden behind a long-vanished house, a particular bend in a stream where the willows leaned and the water made its small, eternal music. We all carry somewhere within us the ghost of a place where we once belonged. These places do not disappear. They live within us, woven into the very fabric of our being, available to us in dreams, in moments of stillness, in the slow hours just before sleep. The pioneer cabin is in this way not merely a historical curiosity, it is a kind of mirror in which we may glimpse, if we are patient and quiet, our own deepest yearning for rootedness, for belonging, for the simple warmth of being held within a place that knows us and that we know in return. The fire breathes, the cabin holds its peace. Beyond the small window a single owl calls softly across the grass. The night settles deeper. the way a heavy quilt settles upon a sleeping body. And we are here, we are still here, in this small wooden room that is, for this brief hour, the very centre of everything. There is no place we need to go, there is no time we need to arrive, we are simply here, gently held, gently warmed, gently breathing, and that is enough. That has always been enough. That has been perhaps the deepest thing that humans have ever known how to be, simply here, simply home, simply at peace within the small sacred enclosures we make for ourselves against the great wide patience of the world. Allow your mind, if it will, to drift now toward a quiet meditation upon the slowness of things, the deep, patient slowness that suffused every hour of pioneer life, and that has in our modern hurry been so quietly and so completely lost. We live now, you and I, in an age of speed. Our food is fast, our communications are instantaneous, our journeys which once took weeks are completed in hours. We have gained by these accelerations much that is genuinely valuable, but we have lost something too, something that the small log cabin upon the great prairie still remembers, something that we glimpse in occasional quiet moments with a strange and tender longing. Consider for a moment the simple matter of bread. In our own time, a loaf of bread is acquired in moments. One walks into a store, lifts a wrapped loaf from a shelf, exchanges a small piece of paper or the brief flicker of a card, and walks out, and the loaf is consumed within a day or two without much ceremony. But for the family in this cabin, the loaf of bread that emerges this evening from the Dutch oven upon the hearth is the final fragrant culmination of an enormous, slow, beautiful chain of human effort. Months ago, the field was ploughed. Weeks later, the wheat was sown by hand, the seed scattered in long, slow arcs from a leather satchel slung across the father's shoulder. The wheat grew through the summer, watched and weeded and protected from the birds. In the late summer it was harvested with a long curved scythe, the blade flashing in the sun, the cut stalks falling in soft ordered rows. The cut wheat was bound into sheaves. The sheaves were stacked into shocks, the shocks were carried by wagon to the threshing floor where the grain was beaten free of the husks with flails, then winnowed in the wind to separate the heavier grain from the lighter chaff. The grain was stored in great wooden bins. When flour was needed, the grain was carried in small batches to the hand mill where two heavy stones turned by a wooden crank ground it slowly into a coarse, fragrant meal. The meal was sifted through a fine cloth to separate the bran from the flour, and only then, after months of labour, was the flour ready to be mixed with water and salt and a small handful of saved dough from the previous baking, and kneaded for many minutes upon the table, and set aside to rise slowly beside the warm hearth, and shaped into a loaf, and baked in the careful heat of the Dutch oven until at last it emerged golden and steaming, ready to be sliced and shared. Each loaf of bread in this slow world was therefore an extraordinary thing. It was the visible result of an enormous and prolonged human effort, and it was treated with corresponding reverence. To break a loaf of such bread was to participate, however briefly, in a long communal labour that involved the family, the seasons, the soil, the rain, the sun, the patient turning of the great millstones, the gentle wisdom of the kneading hands. This same slowness suffused every aspect of pioneer life. Consider the matter of light. We touch a small switch upon a wall, and our rooms flood instantly with brightness. The pioneer, by contrast, lit each lamp by a deliberate small ceremony, drawing flame from an ember, tending the wick, watching the slow blooming of the light. To have light in their world was a small daily achievement, never automatic, never taken for granted. Consider the matter of warmth. We turn a small dial and our houses are heated. The pioneer cut, hauled, split, and stacked the wood that fed the fire that warmed the cabin. Every fragment of warmth he enjoyed was in some sense earned by his own arms and his own back. The fire was therefore not a convenience to him. It was a presence, almost a person, almost a beloved animal that had to be tended and fed and respected. Consider the matter of clothing. We open our closets and select among many garments made by unknown hands in distant places. The pioneer woman shore the sheep, washed the wool, carded it, spun it into thread, dyed it with plants gathered from her own fields, wove it into cloth upon a loom built by her husband, cut the cloth, and stitched it into the very dress she wore. Every garment in this cabin was, in the most literal sense, woven from the labour of the family's own hands. To put on such a garment in the morning was to clothe oneself every day in one's own slow patience. What we have lost in our acceleration is not merely time, although we have indeed lost vast amounts of that. What we have lost is participation. We are no longer participants in the making of our own daily lives. We are consumers of lives made by others in distant places by methods we do not see and cannot understand. We have gained by this exchange an extraordinary efficiency, but we have given up something deeper. We have given up the quiet satisfaction of doing, of making, of slowly bringing into being the very materials of our own existence. The pioneer family, sitting now in the soft glow of their lamps, may have been weary. They may have been calloused and sun-darkened and worn down by labour, but they were, in a sense that we may struggle to fully understand, the authors of their own days. The bread they ate they had grown, the cloth they wore they had woven, the light they read by they had drawn from the earth and tended with their own hands. They were participants in the great slow ceremony of their own lives, and this participation was, I believe, a kind of deep and sustaining nourishment, a nourishment that we, in our convenience, have largely forgotten how to taste. Perhaps this is part of why we find such peace in imagining a place like this. There is something within us, some old, deep memory perhaps, that recognizes the slow rhythms of pioneer life as more aligned with our own animal natures than the rapid rhythms of modernity. Our bodies were not designed for instantaneous things. Our bodies were designed for the slow turning of seasons, for the patient growing of food, for the gentle making of warmth and light and clothing. When we imagine ourselves into a small cabin upon a vast prairie, we are not merely indulging in nostalgia, we are remembering somewhere deep within us a pace of being that was for 10,000 generations the pace at which we lived. The fire crackles softly. The mother lays aside her knitting and gazes for a moment into the embers. The father puffs gently upon his pipe. The eldest daughter turns a page in her book. The boy upon the rag rug draws shapes with his finger upon the warm wood of the floor. The cabin breathes. Time in this small wooden room has settled into a kind of generous and unhurried fullness, a fullness in which a single hour can hold as much meaning as a whole day, in which a single cup of tea can be sipped with the attention that we, in our hurry, have stopped giving even to entire weeks. Slow things are deep things, and in this slowness, a small eternity quietly opens. Let your gaze drift now slowly around the gentle interior of the cabin, and consider, if you will, the profound and quiet truth that every object in this small room is a vessel of memory. We do not always think of objects in this way. In our crowded modern lives, surrounded by so many things that we have not made and that mean very little to us, we have forgotten how a single carefully chosen object can hold within itself the entire history of a family, the entire weight of a love, the entire shape of a long and tender life. Begin with the small clock upon the mantel. It is a simple thing, no taller than the length of a hand, made of dark walnut wood, with a face of yellowing ivory and slim black hands that move with patient deliberation around the painted Roman numerals. It ticks softly, evenly, with a sound like the slow drip of a stalactite in a cave. This clock was given to the mother by her own mother on the day of her wedding 20 years ago, in a small parlour in eastern Pennsylvania. The grandmother is now long dead. The Pennsylvania parlour is a half-continent away, but the clock keeps ticking, here in the small cabin upon the prairie, and every time the mother glances at its face, every time she winds its small brass key, every time she hears its quiet chime upon the hour, she is reaching backward across thousands of miles and through dozens of years, to touch once more the warm hand of a woman who loved her into being. Look now at the small wooden chest beside the bed. It is the cherry-wood chest we noticed earlier, the one with the broken hinge mended with a strip of leather. Within it, among many other treasures, there lies a folded handkerchief of fine white linen, edged with a simple lace. This handkerchief was carried by the father's grandfather in the breast pocket of his coat upon the day he stepped off the ship from Norway, 83 years ago, into the bewildering bustle of the New York harbour. He was 16 years old. He spoke no English. He had 2 silver coins and the address of a distant cousin in Pennsylvania. written upon a folded scrap of paper. The handkerchief had been pressed into his hand by his own mother, who he would never see again, who whispered to him as the ship was about to leave that he must always remember to clean his face before meeting strangers, that this small cloth would carry to him, across whatever distance, the soft remembrance of her love. That handkerchief has crossed an ocean. It has crossed a continent. It has been folded and unfolded by 3 generations of trembling, grateful hands. It now lies, perfectly clean, perfectly preserved, in the cherrywood chest beside the pioneer bed, waiting to be unfolded yet again upon the day, perhaps decades hence, when this family's own children will hand it down to children of their own. The handkerchief is no longer merely a piece of cloth. It is a thread, in the most literal possible sense, connecting one generation to another across the great oceans of time. Look at the small wooden cradle, set into the corner near the bed. It is no longer in active use, for the youngest daughter has outgrown it, but it has not been thrown away. It will not be thrown away. It was made by the father with his own hands 3 months before the eldest daughter was born, in those long anxious evenings of the first marriage's first pregnancy, when he sat at his workbench by lamplight and shaped the rockers and the headboard and the gently curved sides, knowing that within a few weeks the cradle would hold his first child, his daughter, his small new arrival into the world. He carved upon the headboard a simple rose, the same rose that grew beside his own mother's cabin door in the place of his boyhood. Each of his 3 children has slept in this cradle. Each has been rocked in it by these same patient hands. The cradle now waits, quiet and watchful, for whatever future children may yet come, and after them perhaps for grandchildren, and after them perhaps for great-grandchildren. The cradle will outlive everyone in this cabin tonight. It will outlive the cabin itself. It will continue its slow, quiet work of holding small new lives long after the names of the people who first made and used it have been forgotten by all but the dust. Consider the iron skillet hanging from its hook beside the hearth. It is a heavy, blackened thing, much used, its inner surface burnished to a deep, glossy finish by many decades of cooking. This skillet belonged to the mother's grandmother. Before that it belonged to her great-grandmother. Before that it was bought in a small shop in Philadelphia in the year of George Washington's first inauguration. The skillet has cooked in its long life perhaps 50,000 meals. It has fed perhaps 15 separate generations of children. Its weight, when lifted, contains within itself not merely iron, but the patience of every woman who has ever stood at a hearth and prepared food for those she loved. To cook with such a skillet is to cook in the company of ghosts, gentle ghosts, friendly ghosts, the warm and watchful presences of all the cooks who have come before. Consider the small Bible upon the mantel. Its leather cover is so worn that the original colour is no longer recognizable, faded to a mottled brown and ivory. Its pages are soft as cloth, the corners rounded by countless turnings. In its margins, in 3 different hands, are written generations of small notes. The grandfather's bold, looping script underlines passages he found particularly stirring. The grandmother's smaller, more careful hand records the dates of births and deaths upon the front flyleaf. The mother's own neat school-teacherly script appears beside certain verses she has come to find especially comforting in moments of difficulty. To read this Bible is not merely to read Scripture. It is to converse with 3 generations of one's own ancestors, to hear their voices speaking softly through their old underlinings, to feel their hands turning the pages alongside one's own. Every object in this cabin is like this. The wooden spoon worn into a particular curve by a particular hand, the small painted teacup, chipped at its rim, that belonged to a beloved aunt, the hand-stitched sampler hanging on the wall, embroidered by a girl, now an old woman, who once dreamed of the future from a small farmhouse in Vermont, the pewter salt cellar, the brass candlestick, the small pair of children's shoes saved in a paper-wrapped bundle in the bottom of the trunk. This is what objects can be when they are few in number, when they are well chosen, when they are kept across generations with care. They become, in their patient accumulation, a kind of silent autobiography of a family, a kind of tactile genealogy that can be touched and held and carried and passed onward. The modern world, which fills our houses with vast quantities of objects that mean nothing to us, has lost this ancient knowledge. the pioneer cabin still keeps it. And to walk through such a cabin slowly attending to each small thing is to walk through the very memory of human love itself, made visible, made tangible, made warm and dear and faithfully preserved within the gentle keeping of these wooden walls. Let us pause here in the deepening evening of this small cabin and consider one of the gentlest and most profound questions that any human life can ask. What is the legacy of a quiet life? What does it mean to have lived well when one has not been famous, when one has not built monuments, when one has not appeared in the history books, when one has spent one's days in the simple making of bread and the patient tending of children and the slow planting of corn upon a small piece of grassland that no one will ever name in honor of one's labor? The pioneer family, gathered now in the warm amber glow of their lamps, has never asked this question of themselves. They are too busy, they are too tired, they are too embedded in the immediate and pressing tasks of survival to lift their heads and contemplate the meaning of their own existence in any abstract way. And yet their lives, taken in the long view in the patient arc of decades and generations, are a kind of quiet answer to this very question, an answer all the more profound for being unspoken. Consider the eldest daughter, 10 years old, sitting now upon the rag rug with her book upon her knees, her pale braid falling across her shoulder. Within her small body lives the full inheritance of every generation that has come before her. She has her mother's quiet, steady eyes. She has her grandmother's careful hands. She has her great-grandmother's patient way of listening. She has her father's slow, deliberate manner of speaking. She has, in the deepest fibres of her being, the cumulative gift of every life that flowed into her own. And she will, in her turn, give that gift forward. She will marry someone in 12 or 15 years' time. She will have children of her own. She will teach those children to braid their hair, to knead bread, to read aloud beside the fire, to listen to the hymns sung softly in the gathering dusk. Some of what she teaches will come from her mother, some will come from her grandmother through her mother, some will come from people she has never met, who lived and died long before she was born, whose gentle habits have nevertheless flowed downstream through the generations until they reached her, and through her, the children she has not yet borne. This is the legacy of a quiet life. It is not carved upon a marble monument. It is not printed in a book. It is woven instead into the very fabric of a future generation, in the small daily ways that one person teaches another how to live. The mother who teaches her daughter how to mend a tear with invisible stitches is, in that humble teaching, passing forward a gift that will bless that daughter's own daughter and that daughter's daughter for as far as the gift is faithfully passed. The father, in this same way, is passing forward gifts of his own. He is teaching his son, every afternoon by his side at the workbench, how to hold a knife, how to read the grain of a piece of wood, how to listen to the sound a tool makes against a particular hardness. He is teaching more deeply certain attitudes toward labor itself, the patient willingness to take time, the humility to study a problem before attacking it, the respect for materials, the pride in work done well even when no one is watching. These attitudes, absorbed into the boy's marrow during the long, slow afternoons of his boyhood, will accompany him through the whole of his life. They will shape the way he raises his own son. They will reach through that son into the lives of grandchildren the father will never live to see. The pioneer's legacy is not merely genetic, not merely material, not merely a matter of land or possessions passed from one generation to another. It is more deeply a legacy of habits, of attitudes, of small daily ways of being in the world. The mother's particular way of singing to a fretful child, the father's particular way of greeting a neighbor at the gate, the family's particular way of pausing for a brief grace before each meal. These small things, repeated thousands of times across a lifetime, become the very texture of a household, and they pass forward through the generations as surely as the color of an eye or the shape of a hand. There is a kind of quiet immortality in this, not the loud immortality of fame which insists upon being remembered by name, but the gentler immortality of influence, of pattern, of the small good shape that one life imparts to the lives that come after it. The mother in this cabin will not be remembered in any specific way 4 generations from now. Her name may be lost, her face may be forgotten. The cabin itself may have long since collapsed into the prairie. And yet some small great-great-granddaughter, far in the unknowable future, will mend a tear in a child's shirt with invisible stitches she has been taught by her own mother, who was taught by her mother, who was taught by her mother, who was taught by the mother who sits before us now beside this hearth. And in that small, careful mending the woman of this cabin will live on. Anonymously, perhaps, but truly in the patient hands of a descendant she will never meet. This, perhaps, is the great consolation of the quiet life. It does not require monuments, it does not require recognition, it requires only faithfulness. It requires only that one do well, day by day, the small tasks set before one. It requires only that one love one's children, and teach them what one knows, and live with patience and care among the people and the place to which one has been given. From this faithfulness, this small daily faithfulness, springs a current of goodness that flows downstream into the future, and that nourishes lives one will never see, in ways one will never know. The hearth glows softly. The mother lays down her knitting, the father sets aside his pipe, the eldest daughter closes her book. The boy, having drawn enough imaginary shapes upon the floor, sits up and stretches. The youngest, asleep already in the loft above, breathes in the slow, deep rhythm of profoundly trusting sleep. The cabin holds them all, quietly, perfectly, exactly as it has held countless evenings before this one, and exactly as it will hold countless evenings to come. There is a great peace in the simple knowledge that one has loved well. There is a great peace in the simple knowledge that one has done one's daily work with care. There is a great peace in the simple knowledge that one has been faithful to the small sacred place where life has set one down. The pioneer family does not speak of these pieces, they do not need to, they live them, and the living of them is a kind of quiet music that fills the cabin, that fills the prairie evening, that fills the slow cooling air of this gentle hour. To leave behind, at the end of one's days, a family that knows how to love each other, a small place that has been tended with care, a few small habits of grace passed forward into uncertain futures. This, perhaps, is what it means to have lived a meaningful life, and it is enough. It has always been enough. It is perhaps the only thing that has ever truly been enough. The lamps are dimmer now. The fire upon the hearth has settled into a slow glowing bed of coals, deep red, deep gentle red, the colour of late autumn apples in the last hour of dusk. The cabin is very quiet. The mother has put away her knitting at last, folding it carefully into her sewing basket and setting the basket upon its small wooden shelf. The father has knocked the last embers from his pipe and laid the pipe upon the mantel. The eldest daughter has climbed the ladder to the loft, and her brother has followed her, and the soft sounds of their settling into bed have already faded into the deeper silence of the upper room. The mother stands now beside the hearth, gazing into the gentle coals, her hands folded loosely before her. Her face in the soft amber glow is the face of a woman who has had a good day, who has done her work well, who has nothing weighing upon her heart that cannot wait until tomorrow. She breathes slowly, she breathes deeply, the cabin breathes with her. The father blows out the last of the table lamps, leaving only the soft glow of the embers and the small candle upon the mantel, which he will carry with him to the bedside before extinguishing it. The shadows lengthen and soften throughout the room. The corners disappear into a gentle darkness. The cabin grows dimmer, dimmer, dimmer still, like a slow theatre being prepared for the long, peaceful play of dreams. Listen, now, to the small sounds of the night settling in above. In the loft, the children are whispering softly to one another, sharing some small secret of the day, some small wondering before sleep. The whispers are too quiet to be made out, but they are sweet, they are companionable, they are the soft voices of siblings who love each other in the patient and uncomplicated way that siblings can love when their world is very small. The whispers grow slower, they grow further apart, they fade. There is a small cough, there is a soft yawn, there is a long, long silence, and then the slow, deep breathing of children at sleep. Outside the cabin, the prairie has fully entered the night. The sky above is enormous, an immense black bowl scattered with countless silver stars. The Milky Way itself stretches across the heavens in a long, luminous river, and where it is densest near the constellation of Sagittarius low in the southern sky, it gleams like spilled milk on a polished black floor, There is no other light for many, many miles. The nearest neighbour is asleep in his own cabin 5 miles distant. The nearest town lies a full day's ride away. The cabin is therefore a tiny golden island, alone upon an ocean of grass beneath an ocean of stars, infinitely small and yet infinitely safe. Coyote calls far away. Its voice travels across the empty grass for a long time before reaching the cabin, and by the time it arrives it has become so soft and so distant that it is almost a kind of music, almost a kind of prayer. Another coyote answers even farther away. The two voices weave together for a moment, then separate, then fade, and the prairie returns to its great listening silence. Inside the cabin, the mother and father move now toward their own bed. They do not speak. They have done this together so many times in so many quiet evenings that words are unnecessary. The mother loosens her hair from its day-long pins, and it falls down across her shoulders in a long, soft cascade, the colour of dark honey now in the dim firelight. The father unbuttons his shirt and folds it carefully across the back of the chair. They wash their faces in the basin of cool water beside the bed, the water releasing into the air a small sweet smell of lavender from the bar of soap the mother made last spring. They climb into the bed together, drawing the heavy quilt up over their tired bodies. The bed welcomes them, the rope frame creaks softly, the grass tick rustles in the way of all grass ticks. They settle into their accustomed positions, the mother nearest the wall, the father nearest the room. He turns to her, lays a soft hand briefly upon her cheek, and she smiles in the dimness, and he smiles in return, and that is all the good night they need, and it is enough, and it has always been enough. The candle upon the mantel burns lower, the fire upon the hearth glows gentler, the cabin fills with a deep and perfect stillness broken only by the soft, slow breathing of the family. The mother is the first to drift into sleep, her face soft in the dim glow, her breath gradually deepening, deepening, deepening still. The father follows her, his hand falling open beside him on the quilt, his eyes drifting closed, his shoulders releasing at last the small quiet weight of the day. Above, in the loft, the 3 children sleep in their small warm row, their cheeks flushed with the heat of the upper air, their small chests rising and falling in 3 different rhythms that gradually, mysteriously begin to synchronize. The eldest girl's hand has come to rest gently upon her younger sister's small head, in a half-conscious gesture of protection that she is not aware she is making. The boy lies on his back, one arm flung above his head, the very picture of childhood abandoned to the deep work of sleep. The fire upon the hearth releases one last small pop. Single ember rises, briefly into the chimney, glows orange for a moment, tanned is gone. The cabin holds its breath. The cabin holds its peace. The world settles. The world settles. The world settles further still. And now, dear listener, allow yourself, if you will, to drift toward this same slow rest. Let your shoulders fall further. Let your jaw soften. Let the breath move in and out of your chest in long, slow, untroubled waves. There is nothing you must do tonight. There is nowhere you must go. The cabin is here. The fire is glowing. The family is asleep. The prairie is vast and silent beneath its great dome of stars, and you are entirely, perfectly, unconditionally safe. Imagine yourself perhaps upon a small bed of your own in a corner of this cabin, beneath a quilt of soft faded fabrics, your head upon a pillow of fresh prairie grass. Hear the slow, distant breathing of the sleeping family. Smell the gentle smoke of the dying fire. Feel the warmth of the chimney stones still radiating their long-saved heat. Feel the great patient embrace of these wooden walls, these walls that have sheltered so much love, these walls that will continue to shelter long after this night, long after all of us, the slow, sweet ceremony of human rest. Your eyes are growing heavy. The cabin is dim. The fire is dimmer still. The world is a slow, soft, dark, golden hush. There is nothing to do. There is nowhere to be, only this gentle drift, only this slow descent, only this kind, slow, patient release into the deep, soft, tenderless arms of sleep. The fire dims, the fire dims, the fire dims still further. A single coal pulses, glows, fades. Another pulses, glows, fades. The slow, soft heartbeat of the embers grows gentler, gentler, gentler still, until at last it is nothing more than a deep, banked warmth beneath a fine grey blanket of ash. A warmth that will keep the cabin gentle through the long hours of the night. Warmth that will be coaxed back into flame in the morning by the patient hands of the mother, but that for now, for these long sweet hours of darkness, simply rests, simply holds its peace, simply breathes. The cabin breathes. The cabin breathes. The cabin breathes its long, slow, sleeping breaths. Outside the prairie is still. The grass that bowed and swayed all day in the long travelling winds now stands almost motionless beneath the great vault of stars. The soft mist has begun to gather low among the stems, a pale silver mist that drifts barely a foot above the earth, like the soft breath of the prairie itself sleeping. The cottonwoods along the distant creek stand black and silent against the starry sky. The owl that called earlier has fallen silent. The coyotes have curled into their dens. The world is at rest. Above the cabin, the great wheel of the night sky turns slowly, slowly, with a patience older than any human thought. The stars trace their long, slow arcs across the heavens. The same arcs they have traced for billions of years, the same arcs they will continue to trace for billions more. The Big Dipper hangs low in the northern sky, its handle pointing toward the slowly rising constellation of Bootes. Cassiopeia traces her crooked W high in the east. The North Star burns with its quiet, faithful light, steady, eternal, the patient anchor around which all the other stars wheel in their slow, immense dance. In the loft, the children sleep. They sleep, they sleep. Their small chests rise and fall in slow, deep, contented breaths. The eldest girl's hand still rests upon her younger sister's small, soft head. The boy still lies upon his back, his arms still flung above his head, his face still soft with the absolute trust of a child at peace. The youngest, smallest sister sleeps curled like a small warm seed in the very centre of the pallet, her tiny mouth slightly open, her tiny breath, the softest, slowest, most peaceful sound in the entire darkened world. In the bed below, the mother and father sleep. They sleep. They sleep. Their hands have found each other in the slow drift of the night, and they rest now, palms loosely touching in the small, quiet companionship of a marriage that has weathered many seasons, and that has settled in the long fullness of time into something deeper than romance, something quieter than passion, something more enduring and more true. They sleep, they sleep, they sleep. The cabin sleeps. The cabin sleeps. The cabin sleeps. And you, dear listener, are sleeping now too, or very nearly so. The long, slow waves of rest rolling gently through your body, drawing you down, drawing you down, drawing you down into the deep, soft, kind, dark arms of sleep. There is nothing more for you to do tonight. There is nothing more for you to think about, nothing more for you to worry about, nothing more for you to carry. Set it all down. Set it all down beside the warm hearth. Let the cabin keep it for you gently, faithfully, until morning. Imagine, tone last time, the small wooden walls around you, the slow, low glow of the embers, the soft breathing of the sleeping family, the vast prairie outside, silent beneath its great dome of stars. The whole world held in this one perfect, gentle moment of rest. Breathe in, slowly. Breathe out, slowly. Breathe in. Breathe out. Breathe in. Breathe out. The cabin holds you. The cabin holds you. The cabin holds you. The prairie holds the cabin. The prairie holds the cabin. The prairie holds the cabin. The night holds the prairie. The night holds the prairie. The night holds the prairie. The stars hold the night. The stars hold the night. The stars hold the night. And something larger than the stars, something more patient than the prairie, something kinder than any wooden walls, something deeper than any human language, holds you, holds you, holds you, gently, faithfully, for as long as you need to be held. You are safe. You are warm. You are loved. You are home. Sleep now, dear listener. Sleep, sleep, sleep. The fire dims, the cabin breathes, the stars wheel slowly, the prairie stretches outward in all directions beneath the great patient sky. And somewhere in the small dark centre of all this gentle vastness, you rest, you rest, you rest, until at last, with the soft, slow breath of someone who has come home to themselves, you drift completely into the deep, warm, kind, eternal arms of sleep. Good night. Good night. Good night. Sleep well, dear traveller. Sleep well. Sleep well. The cabin will be here, exactly as it is, exactly as it has always been, whenever you wish to return. The fire will be glowing. The lamps will be soft. The family will be sleeping. The prairie will be vast and silent beneath its endless dome of stars. It will all be here. It will all be waiting. It will all keep its quiet vigil. And now, beloved listener, sleep, sleep, sleep. Good night. Good night. Good night. Welcome to Sleepy History with Henry. Here, we harness AI to breathe new life into authentic historical records, creating an immersive auditory experience. This entire production is AI-assisted, crafted solely for relaxation and sleep support. TAND is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Please do not listen while driving or operating machinery. Now, let Henry and AI guide you on a peaceful journey through the past.